The NHL draft is coming up
1 week
next
away.
week. Yeah, 1 week away in Nashville, and it's the rumor mill is a churning there, Justin Pooney.
Oh, really? Is Adam Fantelli going first overall instead of Connor Bedard?
No, that's not happening. No, that's definitely not happening. Let's bring in our NorthStar Bets NHL insider, Chris Johnston. Chris, you've been doing a ton of these, I know, during this time. It's silly season in the NHL. Let's focus on the Leafs. And instead of asking you, is one of the core four going to be traded? Because I'm so tired of that question and hearing that. How about, can a team in the NHL have success with multiple $10 million players?
I think they can. I mean, look, the cap for next season is going to be $83.5 million, so essentially a flat cap from where we've been. But if you look beyond that point, I think it's going to jump to $87 million and change, probably into the $90 million range and above in a couple of years' time. And so I don't think that you can look at it and say that you can't win with multiple $10 million players. I mean, really what you need is enough good players or great players to get the job done. There's not one pattern here that leads to Stanley Cup success. I think the Leafs have been burned in some ways. If we're going to look back just for a minute, the fact that they signed those contracts for Marner, Nylander, and Matthews, and then the cap basically because of the pandemic ended up being flat for a number of seasons. That, I mean, you couldn't have forecasted that at the time. But as they're making decisions now on what to do with William Nylander and Austin Matthews specifically, with both of those guys eligible to sign an extension, I think that they're both going to ultimately sign extensions in Toronto, and I do think you can win if you have players making big bucks.
CJ, we're starting to see a lot of teams re-sign their pending UFAs right now. Nothing from the Leafs so far with the likes of Noel Acciari, Ryan O'Reilly, and Luke Schenn. Is it more and more likely as the days go on that they will all test unrestricted free agency come July?
Well, we're getting to that point, right? And I have no knowledge to suggest the Leafs have ruled out bringing back any of the UFAs, but it is a large number of players and an increasingly dwindling number of days. And if you're in the skates or the shoes of those players, you also might be getting curious if you've waited this long, what might be out there on the open market in July 1st. And so, there's a bit of that game that goes on from both ends of this. I do think the Leafs do have ongoing discussion with their UFAs. I think that they, the one I'm wondering about probably mostly is Michael Bunting. What happens in his case? I don't think anything's changed in that. He'd love to remain with his hometown Maple Leafs, but there haven't really been any substantive negotiations with him. And so, I think when you stack up and look big picture, it's pretty clear the Leafs are going to be having a number of players walk out the door on that UFA market, just because I don't see how they're going to sign 10 contracts between now and next Friday.
One of those UFAs is Ryan O'Reilly, and there's reports out there that he may not have closed the door on returning to the Toronto Maple Leafs. So what's his price term, and how can the Leafs make that work?
I think the price would be somewhere around $5 million, maybe a little bit more. It probably is tied to the term, right? If you're signing him for 3 years or 4 years, maybe 4 years gets it done at 5. I think that's kind of the ranges we're looking at, 3 to 4 years, and then $5 million and maybe a little bit more. And then that's where the negotiation kicks in, not just for the Leafs, but I think anyone. And, it's a big decision for Ryan O'Reilly. Still is a pretty effective player. I thought he played well for the Leafs in the playoffs, put up some points after coming over the trade deadline. Obviously, his last season was marred by a couple sort of fluke injuries. He had a broken foot and a broken hand because he was hit by shots. And so, I think that, if you're the team on this end of things, you're probably, just because of age, you're nervous about the term. But that money could be a fit, and we'll just see where things end up with Toronto. I don't know how to handicap this one, but I think it's notable that he's still open to remaining a Leaf, because I'll tell you, if we had this discussion the day at the Leafs locker cleanout, a couple days after their season ended in that second round series to Florida, it sounded like he was talking about the Leafs in the past tense at that point. But, with a little bit more time here, the discussions are ongoing with Toronto.
Now, we know, CJ, that the free agent class this year is not the strongest, but the trade market seems to be very, very strong, especially on the defense side. Reports are that Noah Hanifin is now not going to sign a contract extension with the Calgary Flames. What do you see the price tag for some of these defensemen out there, like a Hanifin, a Sam Girard out of Colorado? What do you think the price tag is going to be for some young defensemen?
Well, typically, you're this time of year, you're seeing first-round picks move for impact players. I think the question is with Hanifin, is he being traded just with 1 year left on his contract, which is where he sits today as an expiring asset? Or is maybe there an ability for the Flames here to work with opposing teams and get a contract extension as part of the entire deal? And I think you're going to see a better package. And what's fascinating is that's a trend to me. It's not even just positionally. I mean, you have the same discussion going on with Alex DeBrincat and the Ottawa Senators, 1 year out from UFA, not resigning there, so the team's trying to work with him. Pierre-Luc Dubois and the Winnipeg Jets are in that situation. We'll see what unfolds in Calgary, but the Flames have a number of players eligible to UFAs in summer 2024. In addition to Hanifin, you got Elias Lindholm, Michael Backlund, a few others. And so, we're seeing more than if we're talking about an emerging trend is sort of teams having to work with the player to try to make the trade work the best way possible. And that's usually sending that player to a small handful of suitors where that player is willing to sign. And so, it's tough to put a price tag on what a Hanifin trade would look like until we know, is it going to be, a trade with a contract extension or just for a rental player?
So yeah, you mentioned the trend of working with teams and players on finding new deals. What we saw last year for the first time ever, a sign-in trade kind of in the NHL, the Matthew Tkachuk deal. We see a whole bunch in the NBA. Is it now GMs are kind of finding more creative ways with a flat cap to acquire new players like that through trade?
It seems that way. I think that there's maybe even increased reluctance now to get to next summer and figure out what you got and have players walk out the door for nothing. I mean, that's a sensitive topic in Calgary because that's how it went down with Johnny Gaudreau. You'll remember last summer where the Flames, right until 2 days before free agency, were trying to re-sign him, and we're hopeful that would happen. And ultimately, he went to Columbus for nothing. And so I think, you're seeing teams treat these players as assets and approaching the situation that way, maybe a little bit more open and honest dialogue where the players are saying, even a year out, I'm not signing a long-term extension here. So, do with that information what you will. I'll honor my contract. I'll play next season, but then I'm going to test the open market. And so, yeah, I think there's a little bit of that going around. And when you can do a sign and trade, remember, there's an advantage for the players. You can sign an 8-year deal with the team you're currently on. If you go to free agency, the longest you can get is a 7-year deal. And so that's what happened with Tkachuk, an 8-year deal in Florida. And earlier this offseason, we saw Damon Severson go to Columbus on an 8-year sign and trade.
And we're speaking to Chris Johnston of NorthStar Bets. CJ, Winnipeg is such an interesting team in this whole situation because it seems like everybody wants out. If you had to predict and figure out who's actually going to leave this team, who would you say would be those players?
Well, among their impact players, it's pretty clear that Blake Wheeler doesn't have a future with the team. I think that they're working with Blake, trying to find a trade, and there's a buyout possibility there. Should the Winnipeg Jets be unable to trade him before the buyout window closes on June 30th. Where it gets a little bit tougher to get a handle on things is obviously they're having discussions on Pierre-Luc Dubois and Connor Hellebuck. And, I think the Jets are willing to be patient if they have to be, meaning there is a world where they bring back one or both of those players, even if they're entering the last year of their deal and letting things play out. And so, I would have to think one or both of them are most likely gone in addition with Wheeler. It does seem like the door might be open for Mark Scheifele, who's in a similar spot with potential unrestricted free agency in summer 2024. I think the team maybe is a little less focused on trading him, and so you might see him back. But yeah, I mean, add it all together, this last run of Jets hockey, in which they've had a lot of good teams, they got to a Western Conference final. It does look like it's basically coming to an end in some form, or it's taking on a different look going forward. And the Jets don't want to rebuild. I should underline that too. So when we're talking about some of these potential trades, I mean, they're looking to get players back and to keep going forward because they still have Nick Ehlers and Kyle Connor and a lot of, good players on their blue line, both prospects and established guys like Josh Morrissey in their lineup. So this is more of a retool or reshifting what the franchise looks like, but it's not a rebuild.
I was going to say, we got to ask, any update on the Austin Matthews contract situation? I know everybody in Toronto is dying to know what's going on with that front.
It's pretty quiet right now. He did meet with Brad Treliving in Arizona last week, and that some of that is literally just a get to know you kind of thing. I don't get the sense that there've been anything really going on in terms of tangible back and forth with numbers. I mean, let's call it as it is. When you're a player of Austin Matthews' stature, and you could go to free agency potentially next summer. I mean, he's maybe not exactly naming his contract, but I don't know that it's quite the negotiation it would be with players that are a little lower on the hierarchy of NHL stars. And so really this is about Austin, I think, taking his time with the deal, getting comfortable with the front office, and ultimately making a call. I think it'll probably happen a little later in the summer. Could be wrong on that. Obviously, things can change on a dime, but I don't get the sense, even though he can sign that extension officially on July 1st, I'd be surprised if we had an announcement that day. And we have to underline here. That's not unusual in cases like this. I mean, Nathan McKinnon was in the same position last summer with the Colorado Avalanche. He didn't sign his extension until September. David Pastrnak actually played into this season with the Boston Bruins on an expiring deal before doing a new contract in March. And so just if we get to July 2nd or 3rd, and there's no announcement, I would just urge everyone just to take a deep breath. I don't think that there's no signs of trouble. I just don't get the sense that this is the front burner total priority to get this contract done in the next 8 days.
Man, that is all anyone talks about. Core 4 and Austin Matthews. Quickly, just one last thing on the Toronto Maple Leafs, the goalie situation. What are the priorities? Is it buy out Murray first? Is it keep Murray? Is it re-sign Sammy? Or are they looking for another goaltender?
Well, I would expect that they'll re-sign Ilya Samsonov. He was a really strong performer for the team last year. And, it will depend, obviously, where that number lands. But he's a restricted free agent, so he's not free to test the open market. And I do think that they will be bringing him back. The Leafs maintain they're pretty high on Joseph Wall, who played games at the end of the year, including in the playoffs, but had a strong season for them in the American Hockey League. And then we'll see where it lands with Murray. I mean, the Leafs are not a team that buy out players often. The last time they did it, in fact, was in 2016 with Jared Cowan. You can win a bar bet if you ask your friends that one. But what I would say is that typically when they've had inefficient contracts, they've looked to move them. They traded Peter Mrazek in a similar situation last summer to Chicago. Going back, they moved Nick Ritchie after that signing didn't work out to Arizona. And so, I don't know that a buyout will necessarily emerge here, but we'll just have to see if they are able to move that contract, or perhaps when they look at all the options, they might just decide, hey, we'll keep them, use them in limited duty, and deal with the ramifications from there.
CJ, you're the best. Thank you for this, man.
All right. Be well, guys.